Well, folks, you've already seen this beast in action, and I figured you might be interested in some more information about it and crossbows in general. This reproduction here is made in the UK. It's from Todd's stuff. I'm going to link to the website down below. But just keep in mind before you run off to order one of these, he is currently away overseas for a TV contract, and he told me that it's going to be another 5 months, well, a bit less than 5 by now, but still a bit over 4 months, before he will be able to get back to work. So you can still order a crossbow from him, but you just have to be prepared to be patient. First off, let's look at the different parts. The wooden stock is what you would call a tiller on a crossbow. Then you have obviously the trigger, which is also sometimes called the tickler. It's kind of amusing. Then you have the nut right here, which holds the string, and the prod, or lathe, as it's also called. And this particular one here has bow irons that hold the prod in place. And right here you have the stirrup. The first crossbows had wooden prods, so really literally a bow on a stick, if you will. And then later they came up with the steel prods that are, of course, significantly stronger, allow a heavier draw weight. And to show you how the prod is attached, so the stirrup and the 2 irons are slid over the prod before the string is attached, and the prod rests in a cutout here in the tiller, and then the 2 bow irons on either side rest against the tiller, and you have a slot here, and that's where these metal pieces are inserted. They're kind of wedged in there, and you have to hammer them in to make sure everything's nice and tight. So with this kind of construction, you can disassemble it if you want to. If it was lashed to the tiller, that would of course be quite the pain in the behind to disassemble and put back together, and you wouldn't really want to do that. Normally there's not too much need to disassemble it anyway. And by the way, on a crossbow like this, the string can actually be left on. With a bow, for long-term storage, you never want to keep it strung, but in this case, no problem, it just stays like that. This was designed for battlefield use. It's what Todd calls a munition grade crossbow. So the idea is a soldier would just get a pretty simple crossbow, nothing fancy about it. This here is a slight modification. Normally it's just a plain straight tiller. So it doesn't have the taper that this one has. It's just that personal preference. I saw the simple straight tiller and I just didn't like it very much. It didn't look very aesthetically pleasing to me. A more refined shape like this would normally be used on a hunting crossbow because, well, nobility likes it fancy, and they would also have lots of decorations, whereas a soldier's war crossbow would be a pretty simple thing. But yeah, I just personally prefer it this way. It just looks a little nicer. This crossbow has a draw weight of 350 pounds. And some people were incredulous about that. They were just looking at this and going, no way, this is 350 pounds. But yes, indeed it is. That is the force required to pull it back up to here where it hooks in. And the reason why this crossbow is not actually as powerful as you may think when you hear 350 pounds is the short draw. On a bow, you have a very long draw in comparison. Let me just show you here. If you compare that directly, a bow like this, it depends on your height, of course, your arm length, what kind of pull you have, but a pretty standard draw length would be something like 28 inches. A crossbow, on the other hand, uses comparatively short bolts. And all you're getting in terms of draw is the distance between the string's resting position and where it hooks in on the nut. So this is really not much. This is about 6 inches. Now 6 compared to 28, 30, 32, depending on your height. That's quite a substantial difference. And why does it matter? Well, because the longer the distance you have in the draw, the more time the arrow or bolt has to accelerate. Basically having a high amount of force pushing against the bolt, but not a lot of time during which to accelerate it, is kind of like firing, say, a high-powered rifle cartridge from a snub-nosed revolver, which would not be fun regardless, but yeah, you get the point. It's a lot of the power is just wasted because it's already off on its way before it had its full potential in acceleration. When comparing to bows, the maker told me that a 300-pound crossbow would actually be roughly equivalent to a 70-pound bow. So since this is 350 pound, it would be somewhere in the area of 80 pounds. And an 80-pound bow is pretty powerful, but you have long bows with a draw weight of up to 120. I think the highest I've seen was 150 pounds. So that's a lot higher. In order to get anywhere near that kind of power, you would have to have a very heavy crossbow, one with over 1,000 pounds draw weight, and you would need a windlass to span such a crossbow. I'm actually not sure why they didn't put the nut further back. It seems like it would be perfectly possible to get more power out of a crossbow if you simply had a longer draw on it. So let's say the string actually hooks in here. I don't know why they did that. There may be a reason for it, which I'm simply not aware of. If anybody knows, post down below, let us know. But yeah, this is how it is. A crossbow like this was intended mainly against unarmored or lightly armored opponent. Well, medium armor, if you will. I would assume that it probably can punch through mail. I'm going to test that, of course, but at this point I'm fairly confident it will probably do the job. As far as plate armor is concerned, no, this would not be enough. I mean, it would put a dent in the armor, but it wouldn't be enough to penetrate, really. For that, you would need a very heavy crossbow that would require to be spanned by means of a windlass or crannikin. But regardless, this is still a pretty powerful crossbow. Too powerful to be spanned by hand. With a lighter crossbow, you could just put your foot in the stirrup, grab the string with both hands, and just pull up. But this one here, no, not gonna happen. Unless you're a bodybuilder, I guess. But otherwise, it's just too heavy. So you need some help with this. So there are several spanning devices. This is one of them, a goat's foot lever. The way this works is, you see these hooks there? They hook onto the string. These curved pieces here rest on the pins here on either side. And then you just pull back. Of course, I'm not going to span it inside. Then I would have to shoot it, and of course, dry firing or dry. You're not actually firing a crossbow. You're shooting it, but dry shooting sounds weird. But you know what I mean. That's always very bad, regardless of bow or crossbow. You never want to do that. You have to have an arrow or a bolt on there. But yeah. This gives you a lot of extra leverage and makes it possible to span it. As far as how to span it, some people were surprised that I basically put the tiller on my hip and just did it this way while standing, and they were wondering why wasn't I using the stirrup. Well, the main reason was you saw there was a lot of snow, and this is a carbon steel stirrup. So if I just keep putting that down on the snow repeatedly, it's not really great for the steel. So I would have to re-oil it, and it can rust. So I just didn't want to do that. Also, another thing to consider is it's actually kind of a good thing that you are able to span it while standing, because if you have a foot in the stirrup and are all bent over, you're staring at the ground. On a battlefield, you basically want to keep an eye on your surroundings. So if you do it while standing, you can still look around. Of course, for my purposes, target practice, it doesn't matter whether I limit my vision by just staring at the ground, but it's something to consider. So the way the trigger mechanism works is the nut, as it is right now, is locked in place. It's not going anywhere. So it can hook the string, keep it there, and as soon as you depress the trigger or tickler beyond a certain point, this is able to drop. And when shooting a crossbow, you're supposed to, after you've released it, you're supposed to hold the trigger for a little bit, because the nut is going to spin. And you want it to spin freely. You don't want it to just hit another piece and just cause unnecessary wear. On the second time I went out to shoot the crossbow, it actually didn't spin as much as it did on the first time. So it seems like I got a little bit of, I don't know, maybe a bit of debris in there. I'm not entirely sure. It seems to spin a little bit better now. But yeah, might have to take care of that. But yeah, normally as you're shooting it, you should hold it and it just keeps spinning. As far as recoil is concerned, people sometimes ask about that. Knowing rifles, a lot of people expect recoil, the regular way, but that's not what happens with this. In fact, the recoil goes to the front. I don't even know if you can call that recoil, because it goes in the opposite direction, but that's what happens. It's not much at all. I mean, you do notice it, but it's really, because you don't have to work with the recoil going back, you don't need to put it against your shoulder. In fact, there's not much of an advantage of doing so. With a crossbow, it seems more natural to actually just place it at your jaw, kind of like this. So what about the pros and cons of crossbows compared to bows? Well, everybody of course realizes that in terms of speed, the crossbow loses. It just takes a lot longer to span it and insert a bolt and release. With a longbow or any kind of bow, especially when you're well trained, you can lose those arrows pretty damn quickly. Another drawback of the crossbow, of course, is price. It is more costly to make. It is a more complicated device than a bow. It requires more different materials, and there's that. It's pricier to outfit soldiers with those than with bows. However, when it comes to training, this here requires a lot less. Everybody knows, I'm sure, that learning to shoot a bow accurately takes a while. And especially if you're dealing with something with very heavy draw, like an English longbow, it's going to take you a lot of time to build up the strength as well. In role-playing games, agility is often the main stat for bows, but not really. For archery, especially when it comes to heavy bows, strength is very important. You need to be strong enough to draw that. And in fact, you can, on skeletons, you can tell which are the longbowmen, because they have a permanent changes to their skeleton as a result of all the weight pulling on their muscles and their skeletal structure all the time. In terms of accuracy, I'd have to give it to the crossbow, especially considering that it doesn't require a lot of training to get pretty precise with it. The first video I showed with this is actually a good example, because I had actually never shot a crossbow before, neither medieval nor modern. So complete newbie was my first time, and I shot reasonably accurate. Granted, it was not a very long distance, but some pretty good groups. So it's pretty easy comparatively. And also you have the advantage that you can aim for as long as you want. With a bow, of course, you're gonna get fatigued pretty quickly. So you can't just be standing there at full draw and just wait for it. It's not gonna happen. With a crossbow, you can stand there all day and just wait for the target to pop up, and there you go. Also, one thing to consider when you compare arrows to bolts, and yes, I know the tip is broken off, but that's why I'm using it for demonstration purposes indoors. The bolt is going to be quite a bit thicker and heavier. So potentially you get a somewhat larger wound with this. And as an interesting side effect, I noticed that apparently the wooden fletchings, those would be preferred on the battlefield because they are simply sturdier. They don't fly as well as feathers, but you can imagine they're pretty heavy duty. And those seem to have a tendency to widen the wound channel just by penetrating so far till it gets up there. So this would give you quite a nasty wound. And talking about this thing, yeah, you can see that this is pretty gruesome. A point like this would mainly be used for hunting. If an unarmored target were to have an unfortunate encounter with this, you can imagine this would be extremely nasty. You would basically have no way of getting this sucker out. It's just, those barbs are massive, obviously. So you would have to cut it out. So I think that covers everything for now. I may have forgotten some points. If I have, I'm sure somebody will point it out. But other than that, I'm sure you want to see some more action. So here you go.